Welcome back, and it's exactly a week until schools reopen for the 2024 school year, and uniforms continue to be a sore subject for many parents due to high costs. The Competition Commission says it's been inundated with complaints about these soaring prices. In fact, a 2023 report by the Human Rights Commission in the Eastern Cape found that school uniform and appearance policies also infringe on pupils' dignity. The Commission's Eastern Cape manager, Dr. Eileen Carter, joins us this morning to unpack the story. We're also joined by Dr. Joanna Rady, who is a lecturer in the Department of Public Health at the University of Otago. That's in New Zealand, as we give you a broader picture of uniform policies, not here at home only, but also around the world. I'm going to begin at home, though, with you, Dr. Carter. And it does feel, as parents, that the issue of profits is taking center stage instead of us making the comfortability and the mental health of our pupils our first priority.
Well, that's certainly something that we considered when we undertook this investigation into the overregulation of school uniforms and appearances. What we did, though, is we assessed it against what we have as our parameters, and that's the Bill of Rights. And the Constitution is very clear. We are serving to the needs of basic education of children, and that's the baseline that we need to work from, as well as the best interests of the child. So in assessing school uniform policies and appearances, that's where we need to start. And if a school uniform policy or a regulation is not assisting children to access this basic right readily, we need to go back to the drawing board and see whether we need to reassess.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Rady, I want to bring you in and get your perspective from New Zealand. And, you know, something that you said in an article that you wrote just earlier this year, you talk about the fact that uniforms have actually no real bearing on school outcomes, on educational outcomes, right? What are we doing wrong here from your perspective in New Zealand?
Well, I think in New Zealand we are getting a little bit too caught up in the uniforms themselves and forgetting the purpose for which they were instituted. And in New Zealand, that was to remove the worst of outward differences between students so they wouldn't feel ashamed to turn up in class when education became compulsory 150 or so years ago. So I think in New Zealand sometimes we forget that uniforms are a vehicle to get students learning. They're not the end point. And like Dr. Carter said, when you get a uniform that is keeping students out of school, it's too expensive, it doesn't protect their mental health, it doesn't help them be physically active during the day, then it might be worth going back to the drawing board. And the South African situation is very similar in New Zealand and also very similar globally.
Yeah, I think the issue around pupils' mental health is such an important issue, Dr. Rady, and this is something that we are facing here in our country as well. Going back to school, not being able to afford the uniform as stipulated by school guidelines, what that does to a young pupil's mental well-being going back to class.
Absolutely, and beyond the pupil, it's to do with their family. And we need to think about why they've got education in the first place. It's a very sad situation where those people the very people who should benefit from a state education, a good education, have this arbitrary barrier in their way to getting through the school gates at the beginning of the school year. And we have evidence in New Zealand of families delaying sending their children to school because they don't have full and correct uniform on day one.
Wow.
And in a country like New Zealand, that's outrageous. And I expect in South Africa, there's that feeling as well.
Yeah, in fact, you say that it's a high price to pay, uniforms being an obstacle to learning. Dr. Carter, what are we going to do here? Because there's already been findings by the Competition Commission trying to implement, to sort of get rid of these exclusive agreements that schools have with uniform suppliers. It doesn't seem to be working.
Well, Michelle, I think that's what we need to assess. We've been asking, and the Competition Commission, our sister commission, has been in this game for a long time, encouraging schools to come to the table and make sure whether things like blazers in 42-degree heat is in fact required and needed to promote the right to access basic education.
Yeah.
So that has been, trying to get schools to sign pledges and come on board. What the Human Rights Commission has gone to say in our findings is that the department needs to now go back and do an assessment on whether they can issue binding directives to put a cap on school uniform costs. We are asking the department to also look at the practicality of certain of these items, whether I keep on referring to the school blazer, it's just a very easy example, whether things like a school blazer is in fact required. And like Dr. Reedy has indicated, a lot of the purposes behind, the initial purposes behind the school uniforms may not be relevant anymore. And in South Africa, surely the Human Rights Commission found that there is absolutely a place for school uniforms to make sure that we don't differentiate between the haves and the have-nots, that children can go to school and not be compared to the Dlaminis and the Joneses, etc., with the newest fashion. But then we need to make sure that these uniforms are in fact affordable.
Yeah.
And that is what the Human Rights Commission has now done. And we have requested that the department come back with a report to us in April to do that baseline assessment and see whether that is in fact possible.
Yeah. 650 Rand, a new school blazer, just some research we did in preparation for this interview. That's around 55 New Zealand dollars for your purposes, Dr. Reedy. I mean, that's incredibly prohibitive at the start of a school year when we take into account that people have been paid in December, and January is an incredibly long month as we kick off a new year. Dr. Reedy?
Absolutely. And I think we Southern Hemisphere countries have the double whammy of Christmas, school holidays, long school holidays, and then the start of the school year. So, yeah, some people say that a school uniform is an investment, and it is. It's great. I'm sure that you would spend far less over the student's career on a school uniform than you would on ordinary clothes. However, it's the upfront cost and the context of the expenditure of how much you're spending at the beginning of the year in terms of the pay cycles. That is really incredibly distressing and a big barrier to many families.
Yeah, garments that are meant to sort of level the playing field for our pupils, right? So that they go to school, they go to class, and they focus on their education. Dr. Carter, there are other issues at play here as well, right? Uniforms and the fact that in many instances, I think some schools are coming to the party, but in many instances, uniforms are also incredibly binary. There's a uniform for boys and there's a uniform for girls. What does your report say about that?
We've been very clear from the outset, even in our investigations that we receive as provinces on a case-by-case basis, that this differentiation is unnecessary and that it does discriminate based on gender and based on sexual orientation or identity. So the Commission is very clear in its recommendation that there has to be non-binary and gender-neutral options for all students. We always make the analogy to say that boy children wearing trousers can do mathematics, so why wouldn't girl children be able to do the same?
Yeah, it's absurd.
So it is absolutely, and I think the time is really for us to just make way for a little bit of progression in this regard, and we are positive that this year might be it. The Commission will also be tabling this report before Parliament so that we can discuss this with the relevant portfolio committees, because we certainly need to move beyond this. And you would also note from the report, Dr. Reedy, that in certain instances we also prescribe the color of school underwear for girl children, which is quite
it's
concerning.
Intrusive.
And yes, absolutely. So we've been very clear in our findings in that respect, and also the practicality, Michelle. I mean, we are looking at load shedding, Dr. Reedy, in South Africa, where we won't have electricity to iron clothing. Yeah. So can we please look to the practicality for these school uniforms as well? Because at the end of the day, we need to make sure it does not infringe on the right to basic education of children, which is the primary purpose for the kids going to school.
Let's remember why our children are going to school, right? They're going there to get out of poverty, they're going there to get an education. Dr. Reedy, your final comment, especially on this issue around non-binary and gender-neutral options insofar as uniforms are concerned. How's New Zealand addressing that?
I think we're moving more and more towards that, and that's a cost issue. And the simpler the uniform, the more straightforward it is, the easier it is to administer. You don't have teachers wasting their time correcting students' underwear choices. They get to focus on those things that do make a difference to education. For example, the rapport between student and teacher, the climate in the classroom. Energy is directed towards the elements that make a difference to education and learning.
Absolutely.
So we're definitely moving towards more simple,
Dr. Carter,
straightforward outfit.
Yeah, sorry for interrupting you there. Dr. Carter, I just want to wrap up our interview this morning. It seems from our discussions from the vantage point of us here in South Africa and New Zealand as well, is that really it's an appeal to schools to use common sense, to go back to basics, to remember why we are sending our children to the classroom, to think about the socio-economic conditions that many, many of our children are coming from. If there's a parent watching this interview this morning and they're faced with these kinds of challenges with a school that their children are attending, I mean, we wouldn't want children to not go to school, right, because they can't afford a blazer at the start of the new school year. What's your advice? What are the avenues that we can take?
I think when it comes to the procurement issues, the Competition Commission has been very active and complaints can be referred to the Competition Commission. But surely we have offices in all our provinces. We encourage the parents to also contact us, where we will then be engaging with the departments of education in those relevant provinces. For us, the global concept of best interest of the child is always the most important consideration. That will be applicable in New Zealand, that will be applicable everywhere. Yeah. So that's basically the principle and the baseline we're working from.
Let me thank both of you for this very, very important discussion. Dr. Eileen Carter is with the South African Human Rights Commission in the Eastern Cape, and Dr. Joanna Reddy is a lecturer in the Department of Public Health. She joins us from New Zealand this morning. Incredibly important issue. If you are a parent struggling with these issues with the school,